This meeting is now being recorded.
Good morning and welcome to our webinar, Understanding the Basics of Risk Minimisation. I would like to introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Seema Jayati, Managing Director of SJ Solutions. Seema has been specialising in pharmacovigilance for 20 years and has headed up affiliate and global pharmacovigilance whilst also having experience in medical affairs and clinical research. SJ Solutions services span both consulting and contracting to provide solutions to drug safety, research and other affairs relating to the running of a business within the pharmaceuticals industry. Seema, I will pass over to you now.
Thank you, Michelle, for that really kind introduction. So I'm going to go through an overview of risk minimization and some of the basic concepts around that. And I think importantly, take the opportunity, do think of questions, ask questions as we're going along using the Q&A box, as Michelle said, and then, we can come to those questions at the end. So if we look at risk management as a whole, basically this is looking to ensure that your expected benefits outweigh the risks of the product on the marketplace. Now, risk minimization in itself is not a new concept, but as I'm sure anyone who's been working in pharmacovigilance will know, it has been evolving extremely rapidly. And certainly the two documents or the two publications that are relevant are CIOMS 9, which is a working group publication, and Module 16, which is part of the Good Pharmacovigilance Practice series. So if we look at CIOMS 9 now, this was published last year, and really it looks globally and provides guidance with regards to risk management and risk minimization as well. They talk about risk management and the fact that this is about risk prevention and or risk mitigation as well. And the fact that when you do think about risk minimization, you look at it throughout the life cycle of a product, not just through the beginning when you put your product on the marketplace. And in fact, if you've been keeping up to date with some of the risk minimization activities that have been put into place, the additional activities, you'll see that some of these do refer to products that have been on the marketplace for quite a long time. Another thing that CIOMS does talk about is the fact that these risk minimization activities do need to be appropriately balanced to ensure that you don't restrict access to those who would benefit from receiving the product. It is important to ensure that the product goes to the right people, the right patient population in the right way. You do also need to consider, if you are putting risk minimization, additional activities into place as to what the burden is as well, not just for the patient, but for the healthcare system, because that can impact then on whether your activity is going to be a success or not. One other thing that's mentioned is the fact that very often you can't have a universal approach because there is a lot of differences when you look at globally, you look at medical practices and healthcare systems, and very often whilst you'll have that overall strategy, what you do need to do is put into place things that are relevant at a local level and that will meet the local requirements. In Japan, US and the EU, we do have specific legislation for risk minimization activities, and I'll just cover those really briefly. So in Japan, you do need to discuss your risk management plan in the pre-registration process and submit that at the time of the marketing authorization application. Also, once your product is on the marketplace, you do have a collection of information for 6 months so that you can collect all adverse events that are associated with your product. Obviously, if you've got a new product that's on the marketplace, this gives you then 6 months of robust data collection that you can then analyze. Also, if you do have a medicine with a known serious risk or a serious risk that you're wanting to get further information on, then you may actually put into place an all-case surveillance where what happens is that if there is a specific safety signal or a medicine with a serious concern, that you can collect safety data for a certain period of time, and the product can only be prescribed by those healthcare professionals that agree to participate in the scheme. So you can be sure that whoever is using the product or prescribing the product will report that information on. In the US, we know that in 2007, The FDA were granted powers to request a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. So this was their risk minimization activity. And this could be either when your product's put on the marketplace or any time after that as well. And if we look at the measures that are associated, you'd have your medication guide, your patient insert, a communication plan to show exactly how you're going to, or what you're going to communicate out to people. Your elements to assure safe use, which are the actual items that make up your risk minimization. So that could be an education guide, an implementation system, and a timetable for assessment, which is detailed within the legislation as being 18 months, 3 years, and 7 years after the REMS approval. If we look at the EU, we know that we have been required to put or certainly submit a risk management plan for new chemical entities, but as of 2012, all marketing authorization applications did have to have a risk management plan, which would detail the risk management system, and that would include your risk minimization activities, whether that be routine or additional activities. And this is covered in Module 16, that's the risk minimization activities, and we'll come on to that in a little while. Now, you can see that globally there has been an increase with regards to risk minimization requirements, and certainly the areas listed below, China, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong and Australia do require risk minimization activities, and Canada does expect a safety spec and a PV plan to be provided in risk management plans. And certainly within the UAE, the Arab nations, that certainly seems to be a requirement as well there. So you can see globally there is a move towards making sure that you have risk management and risk minimization covered. So looking at Module 16 now, so this was published about a year ago and basically describes risk minimization within the EU. The fact that you should have effective measures that are detailed within your risk management plan. And within the module, they state the aim overall of risk minimization is to prevent or reduce the occurrence of adverse reactions associated with the exposure to a medicine, or should they occur, to reduce their severity or impact. To do that, though, you do need to look at each safety concern that arises with your product and look at the seriousness, severity, frequency, etc., public health impact, whether it is preventable or not, and also take into account what your product is used for and how it's given as well, and where it's going to be placed, the healthcare professional setting. Is it pharmacy only? Is it going to be in the hospital? Is it mainly through GPs? Because that will all add towards your overall decision with regards to additional risk minimization. Sorry, that's not moved forward. So if we look again at Module 16, you'll see that there's discussion about the EU network. And certainly these are all new implementations or requirements as of the implementation of the EU legislation. For centrally authorized products, it would go through PRAC, which, as you probably know, is the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee. And they are really the expert group, PV group within the EU. And they, along with, CHMP, will make recommendations for those products. At the national level, the national competence authorities will implement or ask for additional risk minimization measures as a condition of MAs for national products. Generics do need to mirror risk minimization, and really you need to look at that overall approach in the sense that if you have an active ingredient, you have a certain use for a product, and you have risk minimization in place for that product, then that should really be the same across the board and should not just be for your reference product, or your innovative product, but should be for your generic as well. Hybrid medicines may well require additional measures. And importantly, within the module, it's very clear that the responsibility for these activities, it lies with the marketing authorization holder and the QPPV. And whilst the healthcare professionals and patients are important in making sure that that actual activity is a success, they are not responsible ultimately for the success of that. Responsibility does have to lie with the pharmaceutical company and the QPPB. So now if we look at the types of measures, I think it is really important to point out that most risks are effectively managed by routine measures, and only a few do require additional risk minimization activities. But you may require them if you're trying to look at recognition or characterization of an important risk, or to see maybe what the public health impact is, or if you've got a product that you know shouldn't be taken by a certain patient population and you need monitoring for that or screening, that's when you need to think of additional measures. What is important, though, is that whatever is put into place is very specific and achievable. There's no point putting in something that's very general, not achievable. It's not going to really ensure that you meet the required objective of the safe and effective use of your product in the right patient population. You do usually have a specific target population that is relevant for the risk minimization activity. And as said before, you do need to think about the impact on the healthcare system and the patient as well, and make sure from a burden perspective, is this going to be so burdensome for the patient or the healthcare professional or the system that it's just not going to be a success. So as I was just saying, you do need to really start from the least burdensome approach. And when we look at routine approaches, your patient information leaflets, your prescribing information, your SPC, these are all routine risk minimization. Yes, okay, so as I was saying, risk minimization needs to start from the least burdensome. So, really routine approaches are appropriate in most instances. So your patient information leaflets, your SPC, your prescribing information, all of that has what you need to know generally for safe use of your product, and what patient population should be receiving your product, and what to look out for your risks, your different risks. And you do need to consider which risks do require more than the routine measures listed above, and they need to be tested and evaluated. And one thing that is interesting, or if you think about it, you do evaluate even your routine approaches, because certainly you'll have your user testing for your pills, and that is about evaluating and making sure that whoever is reading your patient information leaflet as a patient understands what's written there as well. And I think that's an important point to consider. It's not just your additional risk minimization. It is even your routine that you do actually evaluate, but you may not think of it in that way. So for your additional information and communication, of course, you can have healthcare provider letters, which provide information on important events, new contraindications or warnings, and you can have dispensing guides as well, patient brochures, and different training programs. Maybe if there's a specific way of using a product, it might be that you need to implement a training program to do that. But what is important is that these aren't marketing tools. They shouldn't be promotional, and you do need to review them on a regular basis to make sure that they are up to date always, and regular assessments as well to make sure that they are in line with whatever the current healthcare system is as well, and they're appropriate. They're still appropriate. If we look at educational programs, I mean, this seems to be one of the ones that we do see quite a few of. Normally, they supplement information that's within the SPC, and you could have brochures, you could have videos, DVDs, but importantly, make sure that whatever you do implement is relevant to the patient population that you're targeting, because if you've got something, say, for example, for an eye problem, there's no point having, small print or a video even, because they may not even be able to see it properly. You might need to provide the tool in a different format. If we look at another tool, restricted access. Now, this is where you control the amount of drug that reaches the patient, but it can be much more burdensome than the tools mentioned before, so the educational materials, etc. You could have an agreement or contract, so maybe where a patient needs to sign to say that they've understood completely the risks associated with the product, or where you have healthcare providers that need to sign as well to say that they understand that maybe they need to counsel the patient before they give the medication. But that can be quite burdensome in the sense that you do need to then have a good way of putting that into place and ensuring that that program has been implemented appropriately. Another tool is a controlled regulatory framework, and this is where you can limit the license or ultimately withdraw the license, and obviously then you don't have access to the product at all. And then you can also restrict through manufacturing or supply chain. So this could be, childproof containers, or limiting the amount that's in a pack, or the color or the shape, or where you have traceability through the distribution chain so that you know exactly where your product's going and who is receiving that product. And very often these kind of things are useful for where a product's going to be either misused or abused, or there's a potential for overdose as well. One specific type of minimization is a pregnancy prevention program, and this is where you have a product that has known or potential teratogenic effects. So, you can think of something like isotretinoin, which is a known teratogen, and the limits that are put in place, or the minimization activities that are put in place with regards to that. So you can have educational materials or controlled access where you have to have a pregnancy test before you're given the product, or you can only receive it for 30 days because obviously that will then fit in with your cycle. You can also have a pregnancy registry, which then provides assessment overall of how effective your program has been. Okay, so, those were the kind of tools that you can have and put into place. These are just some general kind of guidance around your risk minimization activities. You do need to have the right governance structure. You need to ensure that there's a structure where you can have appropriate approval, advice, and you really do have a complete oversight of the full process. You need a tracking system that looks at detailing whether your risk minimization, additional risk minimization, is obligated, i.e. it's requested by a regulatory authority, or it's voluntary and you've put it into place. Also, a time frame for the different steps so that you can monitor how long it takes to implement those different steps. And that is going to be essential when it comes to the inspection setting, where the inspectors will want to see how do you know what risk minimization activities you've got ongoing, and how do you know that you've implemented them in a timely manner. You also need to look at your measure on a regular basis, and you need to ensure that they are relevant and they should be discussed in your risk management plan as well on a regular basis, to say, yes, this is still relevant, or no, this isn't, and we need to change it in some way. You do need to submit your materials for review to the regulatory authority, whether that be within the US, within the EU. Risk management plans, obviously, but it's the actual risk minimization material as well that do need to be submitted. Now, evaluation is a big thing that's come through from the EU legislation that's just been implemented. It's all very well putting these tools into place. You need to make sure that they are achieving the objectives that they're set out to do. So you need to have periodic reviews. Certainly for the EU, this is detailed at about 12 to 18 months. And in the US, as we said, 18 months, 3 years, and 7 years. Now, in the EU, though, an evaluation of the effectiveness is considered a post-authorization safety study, and you would need to refer to Module 8 to make sure, GVP Module 8, that is, to make sure that you have met all the obligations necessary that go with a post-authorization safety study. And that is really, really important to understand that. So if you're evaluating the effectiveness of your risk minimization, it is a post-authorization safety study in the EU. So Other ways of looking at the evaluation, you can have different types of indicators. We've got the process indicators and the outcome indicators. Process indicators really look at impact on clinical behaviour. Has the behaviour that you were hoping to change happened? This is really maybe increasing clinical knowledge in the healthcare professionals or changing the way that they prescribe the product. Whereas outcome behaviours are really about, have you seen a change in the frequency or severity of the adverse events that you're trying to monitor? And that could be either in a non-interventional study setting or through spontaneous reporting. But we know the issues that are associated with underreporting through the spontaneous system. But evaluation itself will show you that your measures have not been effective, in which case you need to reassess what you're going to do. Too complex and not needed, reassess there as well, or that they are appropriate and it's fine. You do need to, though, cover your evaluation in your PSUR and your risk management plan. And when I say PSUR, I mean PBRA. They're used interchangeably, but the PSUR is the official name within the EU. And you need to state what the impact has been on the safety profile and the risk-benefit balance as well. And that needs to be detailed within your PSUR and the PV planning part of your risk management plan. So what you would do is you would include what were your objectives of the tool, the analysis of the ADR, what were the delivery or how did you deliver that risk minimization measure, and what were your outcome indicators. So really it is about, right, we've got this risk, what additional activity have we had to do, what were we hoping to achieve, and have we achieved that? So again, it's not just about putting something into place and saying, yeah, that should do it. It really is thinking about what you're trying to achieve overall. So we're coming close to the end now, and I think what's important is looking at where we're going to be heading overall. And really, I think as most companies are now seeing, the focus very much is on risk management. And in a way, you're getting the kind of the introduction of a new specialist, which is the risk management specialist, who is that expert in ensuring that from a risk management perspective and also ensuring that you have the right risk minimization in place, whether that be routine, whether that be additional, and that it's working appropriately. So you have the right product on the marketplace being given to the right people. A lot of emerging tools, got web-based checklists. Real-world data is extremely important now, used certainly to evaluate the effectiveness of your risk minimization activities. And genetics are also playing a big role in risk management, where perhaps, looking at the difference in responses, you can then target specific subpopulations. I've just got a couple, just to end with, just a couple of examples here. They are in CIOMS 9, but still, I thought it was useful just to kind of have this up here. Most of you, and in fact, what's interesting, these are quite old examples, so, they were before these guidelines and the working group kind of published their recommendations. So, Clozapine, this is an atypical antipsychotic used in treatment-resistant schizophrenia, known to be associated with agranulocytosis and leukopenia, so reduction in your white blood cells. And globally, the company introduced a policy that if they did not have a blood sample to analyze before the patient took the product, then no drug was given. You had to have registration for the patient and prescriber, and there was a national registry system as well in certain countries. So this was quite onerous. I mean, you had to have a blood test, you had to have that blood test come back, and then you would give the product to the patient if it was appropriate. And had to come in for regular blood tests as well. Now, within the UK, they did look at the effectiveness of this, and they collected data, or reviewed data collected over 4 to 5 years, and also in the US as well, they looked at the national registry system as well. And they did show that this monitoring system did work, and that there was a reduced incidence of fatal agranulocytosis and agranulocytosis overall. So, again, there's not specific details there about the actual outcome of the effectiveness measure, as in exactly what the different statistical differences were. But it shows you that by putting something like this into place, you can then really target where the product is used and used in the right way, because it was beneficial to some patients. And then the last one is paracetamol. We all know paracetamol, been around for years and years. It's OTC, means over the counter, mild pain relief and reduces fever as well. But if you do overdose on paracetamol, it can be extremely nasty. It can give you fatal liver failure, or certainly liver problems, liver issues. You'd need a hepatic transplant. And a risk minimization activity was to reduce the pack size, so you could only get up to 32 tablets. And the idea behind that was that it reduces then the amount that's available to the patient, so you can only, the maximum that you'd be able to take in one go is 32. Now, they did do some observational studies, and I think overall that they found it very difficult to say whether this has actually worked or not, and they've not been able to draw any firm conclusions on the impact on mortality overall. There have been a slight reduction in hospital admissions and liver transplantation, but perhaps it just shows you, though, that maybe with this risk minimization measure, maybe it's not as effective as we hoped it would be, and we would need to look at other mechanisms of reducing this risk in the patient population. So I'm going to stop there. That's the end of the presentation. I'm really sorry about all the technical difficulties that we had. I hope that's been quite useful. It's just a very kind of top-line overview of what risk minimization is about, what you should be thinking about, what you should have within the organisation, and a couple of examples there just to kind of put it into a framework for you. So are there any questions?
Thanks, Seema. I've got one quick question. What are the most common requests for additional risk minimisation?
Okay, so I think what's actually quite useful is to look at PRAC, look at the meeting minutes, because it gives you an idea of what they're looking to mandate as far as additional risk minimisation goes. And a lot of the time what you're seeing is probably more about added data or added information in your SPCs, in your patient information leaflets, rather than studies, rather than educational materials. It really seems to be about really strengthening the wording in the approved labelling that's already out there. And it could be because they're considering the burden on the patient and the healthcare professional as well, and the healthcare system overall. But PRAC's a good place to go to have a look at what additional risk minimisation measures are being requested within the EU.
Excellent. Thank you, Seema. I think we've probably tied us up now at the end of the day. Thank you, everyone, for listening in, and thank you, Seema, for a fantastic presentation. What we'll do is we'll target the recording a little bit and fire that through on the presentation slides a little bit later this week. And it'll just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.